Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review slash knife overview to share with you guys. This is the new Kershaw Heist, which operates via a bar lock. And I'm really happy to say that the quality on this thing is very good. So is the price tag. Honestly, I think the price is pretty excellent. I've got a lot of things to say about this knife. I will link this right down below so you guys can check it out if you want to. It is available right now. Whether or not you use those links is entirely up to you. Thanks so much to Kershaw for providing this knife for review. Thanks so much to my patrons for supporting me. And please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. Okay, let's go ahead and measure this knife. We'll try and get through specs here pretty quickly. Overall length of the Heist coming in at about 7.5 inches. Blade length is coming in about 3.25. Cutting edge just shy of 3.25. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons, just a couple today, up against the Ontario Rat Model 1 and the Ontario Rat Model 2. There we go. How about, I'm going to go ahead and put it up against the Civivi Elementum button lock, just because I feel like there's a lot of people who have the Civivi who might be looking at this knife, right? How about up against the Demco 80 20.5? There we go. How about up against the Spyderco Para 3? Alrighty. And last but not least, let's put it up against the Benchmade Bug Out. Okay, how is the action? Boy, you know what? The action is really, really good. This actually operates, you can see right there, the washers on the inside. That's really cool. And the action is very smooth. It's not just like, well, it's fallen. No, it's smooth. It's crisp. Initially, I thought, oh, those little axis nubs, or I'm going to call them axis nubs. They have their own name for the lock, but it's a bar lock that utilizes Omega Springs, right? I didn't think these were out far enough because they've just barely cleared the scales. But you know what? No, they're actually pretty darn easy to actuate and get a hold of. Everything feels very crisp and very good. I'm really happy that despite, you know, the thumb studs not being like super big, they didn't make them pointy. They made them, I mean, this is a good way to do thumb studs. It's everything just worked out. There were a lot of ways that this could have been not super comfortable to manipulate, and it just is. Whether you are right or left-handed, which is important to point out, lefties, they did put a spot for the clip on the left-handed side, which you'd think is a no-brainer, but there's a lot of companies missing the mark on that. Companies, if you make an ambi lock, you need to make a position for the clip on both sides of the knife, like this, right? This is the way to do that, and they did it. So that's awesome. The action is truly great. I'm really, really impressed with that. How about carry profile? Thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. Wow, it's really not all that thick. It's actually a fair bit thinner than the Para 3. Length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3. Yeah, not going to be too angry in the pocket. In fact, it's actually going to take up less room overall than the Para 3 and way less room than the PM2. What are we looking at for materials here? We are looking at an FRN, which initially I thought, oh, it's going to feel real cheap. But you know what? They got some nice texturing on here, and to my absolute delight, they have fully nested steel liners. They're black, so it's hard to tell, right? But this is not a halfway cartridge liner, which is what makes the Benchmade Bug Out feel so cheap. But it's ultra lightweight, but it feels really cheap, right? That's the problem. It feels super hollow. These are backed up by full steel nested liners, which I like. You still get, I know that the material itself is strong, right? It adds, in my opinion, a negligible amount of weight, but it just makes the whole thing feel a lot more solid. I like that, right? The steel is nothing crazy, but it's D2, which I think is completely and totally acceptable. I think it's fine. Kershaw has traditionally done a good job with D2, and I think that's okay, right? So that's what we're looking at for materials. Let's go ahead and weigh it. The weight coming in at not very much, 2.79 ounces, which I think is just fine considering you're getting, you know, almost 3.25 inches of cutting edge and blade. I think the ratios on this thing are pretty darn good, and the balance on it is also very good. Right there, actually right behind the pivot, right where you're supposed to put your index finger, everything feels great. Ratios, all of that, everything's nice. Let's go ahead and do a hardware check. I'm going to get out my tools. As per usual, my tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use in this channel. We have a T8 pivot, which is great. And then we have, as expected, a bunch of T6 screws. We have one screw in the middle, which is kind of helping to hold in that nested liner back there. We got a couple of, it's interesting how they do this. Part of this liner is lipped out here to the back to accommodate for the spacers so that they're actually contacting the steel liner and not what would otherwise be the plastic scales, which is a nice touch, right? It adds a little, at least like the feeling of like, yeah, it's solid. We don't have to question that area, right? So that's cool that they went ahead and did that, right? But the downside is that there's 2 extra screws. I mean, can I really complain about that? The biggest issue here is just the general, complexity that's involved with disassembling a knife that's utilizing this style of lock. Is it impossible? No, far from it, right? But I remember the first time trying to take apart a Benchmade knife and dealing with this, and it was a little bit, right? If you've never done it before, it's not as easy as taking apart a frame lock or a liner lock, but it is certainly nowhere near the hardest type of knife to take apart. It's going to require a little bit more patience, but it's totally doable as long as you have the right tools. You'll be fine. Let's go ahead and measure blade stock thickness. We do not have a thick blade, not at all. Super duper thin. Oof. Very, very thin blade stock, which I think is going to work to this knife's advantage. Have we done everything there? I think we have. Let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes here. This is a good looking knife, and it is an in-house design as indicated by this symbol right here. It is certainly not an aesthetic that is completely and totally unique. Far from it. I think this aesthetic has elements that are borrowed from hundreds of knives, right? So if your instinct is to say, that looks like a copy of the, stop, because it's probably, borrowing elements from something that has borrowed elements from something that has borrowed elements from 100 different designs. It's just the case, right? But this works. The handle profile is super, super comfortable. Very, very comfortable and absolutely, accommodating for people who have, like if you're like me and you wear an XL glove, which really just means you have a regular sized hand. If you're a guy, you can get a full grip on this guy. You can choke up a little bit. I would be careful though, right? They've given you a little bit of space here, but you could easily run your finger up on the blade. The most comfortable position is about right here. The knife also does not look super duper space weird battleship busy, right? And some people like that aesthetic, but I just feel like we see a lot of stuff from Kershaw that's just why, This is plain and it's nice. It looks good and the texturing is meaningful. They're just little bumps, right? But it works. I mean, it's not going to be so much that it absolutely destroys your pocket. It might fray it up a little bit over time, but not bad. Another thing that I'm really happy about is the clip. They've done a good job here. They've made a clip that is not a big, long, stupid clown shoe thing coming off of your knife, as a lot of companies like to do. They've also not given it a giant dragon face bill, which is another thing that a lot of companies like to do, right? This is not a grabby clip. It's not a long clip. It's not a clip that really creates a hot spot. It's all the clip you need and nothing that you don't, right? And it's deep enough. The screws are also recessed. They got that right. And again, you can mount it on this side. Lefties, rejoice, right? They got a lanyard hole on it, but it's totally out of the way, right? It's a secondary thought, as all lanyard holes should be. They should never be, just never be the first thought, right? The overall aesthetic is nice. There's a little bit of a ramp right here, but curiously, they did not add any jimping right here, which I feel like they should have, but it's not really that big of a deal. They get a little bit right here, but they kind of went the way of the Benchmade 940, and the jimping is sort of under, it's like flush, so you can't use it too much, but that's real nitpicky. What I want to point out here is that everything just looks like a huge step up from what I expect from Kershaw's budget line. This is absolutely a budget line. A budget knife. If you don't know, Kershaw under Kai USA, right? They have knives that are made in a lot of different places. Zero tolerance knives, which are the highest end, those are made in the United States. A lot of the top end Kershaws are also made in the United States. Then they also have knives that are made in China. They might actually have knives that are made in some other places, but their least expensive knives are made in China. In, I would say, fairly recent years, a lot of their least expensive stuff was really behind versus the competition, right? From my perspective, that's my experience. The materials were, some people are going to be like, D2! I think D2's fine. I don't have a problem with D2. I don't think D2's anywhere close to being phased out at this price point, right? Now you try to charge me, $200 or $300 for D2, and then But at this price point, no, I think D2 is totally fine. But they were using some 8CR13 MOV. They were using a lot of stuff like that, which I didn't really like. And maybe they still use it here, right? But on top of that, I think the main thing is their fit and finish was really like, wow. Like if you wanted to get a Kershaw that had good, fit and finish, you had to go with the USA line, which was doing really well for a long, is still doing really well for a long time. But this end was not doing great. I don't know if they have a new OEM or what. It wouldn't surprise me, but this is way better. This is right there where everybody else is, right? This is in the same spot as, your Civivi knives and your Kubi knives and your QSP knives. It's all there in the same place, right? The materials obviously can be different, but what I'm talking about is the execution, the fit and finish, right? The overall quality of how everything's coming together. Nothing is goofy. Nothing is out of place. Nothing is unfinished, right? The edge bevels are even. The finish on the blade is nice. Everything is nice. It doesn't look like it was just slapped together, right? Or like they put all the pieces of a knife into a cannon and just fired it at the wall. That's kind of, it's overboard. Their knives weren't that bad. But this is substantially better, right? The edge, the factory edge is wickedly sharp. I'm trying to look for a notebook here so I can get a piece of paper out and give you a little slice demonstration, even though I know it doesn't prove anything. Obviously, your mileage is going to vary if you're cutting a different material. But out of the box, the factory edge is extremely sharp and very thin, right? We have a flat that carries out, 25%, maybe 30% the length of the blade. A huge swedge, which actually makes the knife look really cool. And then the rest of it just drops. It's a flat grind dropping right down to the final cutting apex. And everything looks good, right? Nice and thin, able to slice. The thumb stud is just barely in the initial cutting path, but not bad. I can't even be bothered to complain about that, right? This is just a good day-to-day performer. There's really nothing to complain about. Factory edge is wonderful. Outside of that, I don't know there's a whole lot more to talk about. We don't have bald spots for the clip, but then again, if we were going to have the bald spot under the clip, then you'd have to put it on this side, right? Because lefties, and then you would have this weird thing right here. So truthfully, in and out of the pocket, I'm actually wearing like workout material pants today. It's not bad. I think jeans or something a little thicker, you might have to work a little bit more at it. But because of how they did this clip, it should still be a one hand in and out of the pocket experience, which is great. Lockup, how's that? Completely and totally solid. I kid you not. Completely and totally solid. That is just wonderful. Yours should come, with the ability to, be completely smooth and lock out, solid. You can always take the pivot out and add some Loctite to adjust it to, exactly the way you want. This has washers, so I'm going to show you this here. When a knife has washers, sometimes this can be moved around, and I can kind of move this to get the centering exactly perfect, but that's just kind of that mushy, right? When it's running on washers. But yeah, the blade is centered. Did it not? No. Okay. It acted like it wanted to get stuck there for a second, but maybe it was me. No, everything's fine, and the action doesn't seem to be changing, and the lockup solidity doesn't seem to be changing over time. I've noticed that a lot of axis locks that run on washers kind of do this, but yeah, you can sort of mash the thing centered if you want to. But I think the main thing here is that everything is locking up. We don't have any pivot lash. This is very consistent in here. I'm just, again, got to point this out. I'm really happy that they put washers in here. Why is that important? Bearings are fine, and they will survive better in a dusty or dirty environment than people give them credit for. I mean, the way that you hear about it, like if you're new and you're hearing like online, like, oh, well, washers are going to be better because they keep debris out of the pivot. The way that people talk about it, that makes it sound like if you work near a body of sand, that your knife is just going to explode and become inoperable. No. If you cut a lot of stuff with your knife that's running on bearings in sand, in fact, if you bury the knife in sand, the action will be kind of gritty and you'll need to blow it out with some compressed air. Believe it or not, that is as epic as that quest will ever get. It does not get any more dramatic than that, right? But washers keep all of that stuff out of the pivot and, you know, without you having to do that, right? Now, you could get some sand in here and maybe the dirt in the axis lock thing and maybe, right? But it's nice that you'll never have to worry about it with the pivot. I really appreciate that, and it's really spectacular that they're able to achieve this action and lockup solidity with washers. That's a big deal, right? Like I said, no lockup issues, no pivot lash, consistent in here, right? Pretty snappy down into this position. There's a fair amount of, tension there. It's not really, like there's no detent ball, right? But the tension that's holding it in place is pretty good. So it allows you to kind of snap it out. What's the price on this thing? It comes in at about $54, which, yes, there are companies providing the same materials, or in some cases you'll get G10 for a little bit less, right? But I gotta say, we're looking at a Kershaw here, and I'm just really impressed with it, right? This is a nice ambidextrous knife. It's a good design. It's good day-to-day cutting apparatus, right? It's meant for a lot of different people. Yeah, there are some really competitive options out there, right? Many of which I've reviewed on this channel, and you're welcome to look, but I think this is pretty darn good. And the fact that they got everything else right, I mean, I really just don't have anything to complain about here. I'm just so happy that Kershaw is releasing inexpensive knives that are made for like anyone and everyone, and the quality is actually good. I am a huge Kershaw fan and a huge ZT fan. I've said many times that my first good pocket knife ever was a Kershaw, and it was by accident, right? I technically owe it to that Kershaw Blur for getting me into pocket knives. And anybody who enjoys my content, you also owe it to that Kershaw Blur that I found at Walmart and was a blacked out serrated Tanto, right? That's the whole reason we're doing this. It's just nice to see Kershaw get a win, at least in my book, with a budget knife. I don't think the price is bad. If you like this knife, if you like how this knife looks and the price doesn't bother you, you're really going to enjoy it. I absolutely recommend this knife. So it's going to go on my recommended knives playlist. It's also going to go on my cheap knives I like playlist because it's a knife that I like, and in my opinion, it's cheap. It's under $75. It's a budget knife. This one is good to go. That's going to be pretty much it today, guys. Thanks again to Kershaw for sending this in. This is something that will eventually get given away on a live stream, which usually those take place on Friday nights and Saturday nights. So if you needed a reason to subscribe, well, there you go. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex if you enjoyed this video. Leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.